With me now is Michael Kovrig. He is a former Canadian diplomat who was held in China for nearly 3 years. He's also the executive director of Strategic Effects, an advisory group that focuses on China's foreign policy. Good morning, Michael. Good to see you again.
Good morning, Marcia. Likewise.
I'm going to start with a question that was put to the Foreign Affairs Minister, and that is, would this visit be happening if it weren't for the souring of relations between Canada and the U.S.?
I think it would happen eventually, but whether it would happen right at this time is debatable. Many foreign leaders are trying to go to China to stabilize relations because they see that Donald Trump is going to China according to schedule in April, and because there's obviously a lot of turmoil in the world. But let's keep one thing in mind. Canada has been trying to keep diplomatic channels open with China all the time, throughout, ups and downs, including the last several years of deep freeze. It was the Chinese that cut off communications in 2018 after they had already started deteriorating. So the big change as of November last year was Xi Jinping calling it a turning point and China agreeing to reopen channels. Canada, to some extent, is just taking advantage of that opportunity. Now, is the Trump administration partly responsible for China's willingness to do that? Yes, I think it is.
How aware do you think China is about the potential impact on the negotiations for Canada with the U.S.?
I would imagine that the Chinese negotiation experts are well aware of that. China studies negotiations very carefully. They are extremely adroit, calculating negotiators, always looking for leverage. And so they will have studied the China-U.S. relationship very closely so that they think they understand what is possible for Canada and what is not, and what kind of leverage the U.S. has over Canada. So, for example, I mean, if CUSMA remains intact, there's a clause in there that prevents Canada from having a free trade agreement with China. So there's not much point in making that a negotiation point. It's a question of what the parameters of possible negotiation are, and the Chinese will always be looking for whatever leverage they can find, both inside the negotiating room and outside it, for example, by applying pressure through tariffs, through sanctions, and sometimes even through hostages.
We saw when Carney departed the plane today, as Colin Roberts called it, the charm offensive being put on. Xi Jinping was not there to meet the Prime Minister. I am wondering what you think will be happening behind the scenes before Carney meets with Xi Jinping on Friday. That's still about 48 hours away, but what will happen in these hours in between to pave the way for those talks?
We're likely to see a lot of build-up meetings with lower-level officials. So State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, the Minister of Commerce, Wang Wentao, and, of course, Premier Li Qiang. The Chinese like to build you up, ideally, to the most senior figure, partly, I think, to protect Xi's reputation and gravitas, to make sure that in case things go wrong in the lower-level meetings, they're always withholding the possibility that if you don't behave yourself, that meeting could be withheld. And so what the Carney delegation has to keep in mind during these very delicate days is talking with China is necessary, but doing it without illusions is essential. And that dialogue ultimately is a tool. The purpose of going there and having the meetings is to use the leverage you've built to be able to negotiate opportunities that protect Canada and Canadians, and ideally find some limited economic benefits. But we need to have really realistic expectations, relatively moderate ones. The trip's not about trust or partnership. It's not a full reset. It's about managing risk in a difficult relationship. And to do that, you need to be able to talk to China's senior officials.
And I want to ask you, lastly, Anand as well was asked about the people-to-people relationships. That's an emphasis that she made this morning. In your view, what does that mean, as there's so much focus on trade right now? What about people-to-people relationships? What does that mean for the two countries?
So that has a positive side and a negative side. The positive is that there is, of course, a large Chinese diaspora in Canada, not only ethnic Han Chinese people, of course, but also Tibetans, Uyghurs, and many other minorities from China's vast country, and Hong Kongers. And they have a variety of views, and that allows you to have a more nuanced relationship with the people of China and of Chinese descent in general. And that's very important, and that should never have been stopped or otherwise interfered interfered with, but unfortunately politics encroaches on it. And that enables building up elements of mutual understanding and of strategic empathy, of trying to understand each other's societies and the differences in the political systems in order to find ways to maximize Canadian interests, protect Canadian citizens, and work together. The downside of that people-to-people relations, right? It's not only about student exchanges and tourism and cultural events, although those are great. It's also the fact that there are many Canadian citizens, for example, who have been detained in China. There are over 100 currently in Chinese prisons, and a number of those cases are political cases. And that kind of people-to-people discussion is an opportunity to talk about those cases and advocate for better treatment, better consular access, and ideally clemency and release for prisoners who are there for political reasons. And also for people who have close ties to Canada who aren't necessarily citizens, like Jimmy Lai, whose mitigation hearings in a politicized trial are going on right now in Hong Kong. That's what we're talking about when we talk about people-to-people relations.
Michael, again, really fascinating analysis. Appreciate your time with us. Michael Kovrig is a former Canadian diplomat. We'll talk to you again. You take care.